Today I'm going to be talking with Avi Tenenbaum. He's an expert in disaster behavioral health and psychological first aid. A little bit about Avi. He provides international training to mental health and medical professionals, first responders, and the general public in psychological disaster response and grief leadership. His experience includes providing aid for people coping in the wake of numerous large-scale disasters and wars, including the Second Lebanon War, Hurricane Harvey, COVID-19, Operation Cast Lead, the Meron civil disaster, the Karlin bleacher collapse, Operation Guard of the Walls, and the Russian invasion in Ukraine, and Operation Iron Sword as well. In today's talk, we're going to be talking about his upcoming workshop and the different projects that he's been running, his history about how he went from social worker to first responder to sergeant in the police, and then finally running this organization that he's the CEO of with employees and everything, working internationally, trying to train others in whether they're professionals or they're non-professionals, how to actually respond to emergency situations. It's an interesting discussion. I learned a lot myself speaking with him about how to how to respond in emergency situations. And we touched a lot of different topics, ranging from the philosophical to the practical. So I give you Avi Tenenbaum. So today I'll be talking with Avi. Avi, how you doing? What is going on, man?
Pleased to meet you, Yonatan. It's great to be here.
It's really nice meeting you. So you're going to be running this event here at the place, the Jerusalem Center for Emotional Well-being. And I was thinking like maybe kind of give a little background in what the program is first of all, and then we'll dive into, who you are, what's your background, what you're all about.
Sure. I'm just warning you that when you start asking questions like this, I can go for hours. It's so fun. It's a passion for me. I love teaching this stuff, talking about it, and sharing it. So I'm going to rely on you, Yonatan, to just jump in there when you want to move to the next question. So my name is
Okay.
Avi Tenenbaum. I live in Israel we're coming up in 23 years, originally from Chicago, live in Jerusalem, married an Israeli, went to university here, studied social work, leadership, disaster management, pre-hospital medicine, and law enforcement. And that might sound like those things aren't connected, but they're all connected in the way that they all view disaster, tragedy, trauma from a different angle. So imagine that disaster is in the middle. Let's say it's a person that died by suicide, it's a baby that didn't wake up in the morning, it's a car accident. And so the law enforcement professional will come and maybe manage that situation from his angle. He's
Right.
worried about the forensic side of it. Um, let's say that, you know, the EMS people are going to come and maybe check to see if there's somebody to save and to do the medicine angle. And then the mental health professional, generally speaking, doesn't show up on scene, although in the last few years we've seen a revolution in that. But at least he'll be getting this case a few weeks later, a few days later. If it's a highly public event, then maybe he works in a school and that child that passed away is in the school he works at. It will get to him this way. And so there's so many different avenues of approach when it comes to who's involved in a disaster,
Mm.
the footprint of disaster, helping those people get through it, translating what's going on and supporting them. And so I kind of learned all these things, put them together, put it into a course. Um, it's
Well,
called psychological first aid.
it sounds like you really like in terms of your own development professionally, like you really are playing out that narrative that you're describing from the, first responder, you said EMT, you said you're an EMS, so I'm kind of interested what the difference is there, but the medical first responders, the police, all the way through the therapist. I mean, that really is the narrative. Were you thinking of doing that? Was this an all along sort of thing, or did that just unfold in your life as you were moving forward?
It definitely unfolded. I wasn't going out of my way to put myself here. It
Mm.
started, I would say, in 2006 during the Second Lebanon War. I was a student here in Israel, and the evacuees from up north were staying in Jerusalem.
Hmm.
I wanted to volunteer and help them out. And so I spent weeks and weeks with evacuees, and I understood that I had no idea what I was doing. I didn't quite know how to categorize their levels of needs,
Yeah.
when to speak up, when to give them their space. Are they going through a tragedy? Maybe everything is fine with them. They just happen to be physically located elsewhere. I just didn't know how to relate to that. So that was kind of like the first road,
Hmm.
road sign, the first thing on my journey to kind of take me there.
Yeah.
Then I had a rabbi that was murdered in a terror attack in 2014 in the Harnof massacre.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so I dealt with the fallout of that already as a professional. I was already a professional at that point. 2015, I got brought into some EMS organizations. EMS stands for like emergency medicine, emergency medical services. EMS. EMT is the position.
Mm.
Like
Okay.
you could be a paramedic. Also, you could be a doctor. Also, there's
Okay.
different ranks, different
Gotcha.
skill sets. Anyhow, so I got involved in doing this in an EMS setting, in a ambulance setting, and then eventually I said I could do that, but police officers don't feel that I relate to them because they have their own closed space, and they're not very trusting the society out there. This is even before cancel the police, defund the police. Society's against them. Society's always heaping their problems on them. And I felt that I needed to become a police officer for them to relate and for me to understand their
Hmm.
world. And so I kind of got into it through there. Um, at one point, I said, I know how to deal with small scale disasters, which is like a domestic, like we said, a baby that doesn't wake up in the morning.
Yeah.
It's catastrophic for that family, maybe for that building. But as far as a community wide or nationwide or worldwide event, I went and got special training in Yale
Hmm.
later on, and they had a very nice program for like international disaster management. This was during COVID, so they
Right.
already had some perspectives from there. So it developed over the years, and it took the shape that it did, and here I am.
Well, I mean, at every step of the way, you're moving towards catastrophe. Like even in the very beginning of that story, where, like you're saying, you just had this impulse. I'm just showing up to help people. You didn't know what to do and how to put your skills to good use, and which is flying by the seat of your pants. But like every step of the way, you're moving in towards chaos essentially. I mean, what's pushing you in that direction? What's the motivation there?
Great question. And by the way, Jonathan, I know some dirt about you because I read a lot of your articles in the past, and I know you understand human behavior really well. So that question was spot on.
Okay.
I can only imagine where you're coming from with that question. I was a big troublemaker as a kid.
Mm.
I was always graffitiing up buildings, hanging out with the wrong crowd, climbing into places I shouldn't have been,
You're
getting
having,
into
you're having a good time.
and loving every second of it. So, this is my socially acceptable way of having the action that I think I need,
Mm.
translating that into meaning and help and direction for people that are struggling.
Yeah.
I love helping people. My father is a social worker for over 40 years. He, I think, deals with this in his way because he is an inner city social worker that runs homeless shelters and is always bailing clients out of jail and dealing with all sorts of
Yeah.
crisis. And that's a more typical way that probably, professionals deal with crisis. And I think this is just a step over from there.
Yeah, inner
But
city
it's really,
Chicago is no joke either. I mean, if that's
yeah,
where he's at.
inner city Chicago, exactly. This is not like a rural
No.
pastoral place with, beautiful bushes and everything is fine. This is you know, where stuff happens and people die and people get injured and they're fighting and they get lost and who knows what. So, um, I feel calm in chaos. That's my baseline. I thrive in it. I enjoy it. I've heard this, by the way. It's always interested me. I've heard this from professional soldiers and all sorts of people that are first responders that they thrive in that space, and I really relate to that.
Hmm. What's it like then, moving into that space, like experientially? I mean, like everybody else, I mean, people are defaulting to sometimes they're very worst or they're very best. but you're moving into this with a lot of forethought, not just defaulting on what your proclivities are. I mean, like, how are you moving into that, and how are you kind of seeing what's going on around you?
Yeah, so I think there's a professional way of doing it. The definition of every profession is that there's a body of knowledge, there's some sort of agreed upon way of doing things that when you do it that way, it kind of organizes that profession. So whether it's a plumber, whether it's a crane operator, or a social worker, you're kind of looking at a problem, characterizing it with certain terminologies, and then pulling out certain interventions, and you're basically problem solving. And
Mm,
and and I really think that's what first responders do. And when I teach psychological first aid, it's the same thing. You have a situation unfolding in front of you. I don't care how crazy it is, who's screaming, what's going on, who died. There's a way to assess what's happening, break it down into parts, see what resources you have to bring to bear to solve the issue, what's within the scope of reason that you can solve, and what you absolutely know in advance you can't solve. And then you do your best. And this is true, I think, in every profession, and it's translatable here too. And this is true for an EMT, it's true for a police officer, a disaster management expert, and for a social worker. And I could tell you, by the way, I've studied so many different professions, and I see so much overlap in this way.
mm,
So that's how I think every first responder or social worker does it, right? You sit with your client, you hear what they're saying, you build some rapport, you're using your active listening skills, you're understanding what they're talking about, you're trying to kind of get and zoom closer into, is it this sort of problem, that sort of problem, and then you're imagining in your mind, well, if it's this, then I know this might be the
mm.
solution. If it's that, that might be the solution, and you kind of flush that out in that way.
Yeah, yeah. Making an abstraction of the problem that you can then do something with, creating this sort of inherent organizational structure within it from
Yeah,
from the chaos. Okay,
exactly.
that's fun work.
Yeah.
Yeah, I see your attraction. That's fun work. What with the police officer shift? That's interesting also because where do you think that came? You wanted to try and communicate with the police more effectively. How was it obvious to you that was the way to do it?
I have a chip on my shoulder where people are giving courses in this topic or related topics, but they've never been in the field. And I always
Mm,
say, how do you know that what you're teaching is relatable to blood on the floor, people screaming, there's a crime scene? If you've been there, done it, then I know I can trust you that these are field tested tools. But if you haven't been there, done it, then I have that skepticism.
yeah.
I also didn't really, I really didn't understand what policing is. As
Mm,
much as I tried to imagine, I didn't understand what it was till I did it. Didn't understand experientially the struggles that those people have until I experienced those struggles. And I always say that the highest level of wisdom is experiential knowledge. It's a blend of book knowledge and street knowledge. As experiential knowledge is, you're out there, you're
yeah.
seeing the problem, you're feeling the problem, you're hitting the same brick walls that they are, and you're like, oh, that's what they were referring to. That's what's going on. It's not so simple. And then you can, and then the amount of wisdom you get from those experiences is endless, because then you can kind of understand why society relates to police in a certain way, um, why they're blamed very often for the things that they are, so on and so forth. You can imagine what it's like for the person in the center of that to feel like, what is it like to balance those shifts? They have very difficult shifts,
Yeah.
they're, etc. It gives you a peek into their world.
It's such a unique reason to become a police officer. I mean, usually, like, I'm a personalities guy, so like it's kind of like, well, who are the two sort of folks that become police officers? People who are very high in conscientiousness, like they really want to serve, they're a strong sense of duty and personal sacrifice, and then you have the damn narcissists who want to use that as a way to control people essentially. It's
Sure.
it's rare because you want to learn. It's very rare. Why'd you become a police officer? I really just want to learn. Like that's a really beautiful angle to that sort of service.
Yeah, there is a sense of calling that is the common denominator of all helping professions. And you can ask, why did I get into the field of mental health? And I have that feeling. And I also was taught by my father. By the way, also my sister is also a therapist. My
Hmm.
brother is also a therapist. And my mother is not a therapist, but she's always helping people. And so this is something I was raised into, that this is how we use our time. This is what we're here to do in this world. But there's a sense of rising to the occasion. There's a problem, and if you have the consternation, the personality, the skill set to get up and do something about it, then take that responsibility, put it on your shoulders, and you're gonna find meaning out of doing it. We had very sad news this morning of the Israeli Defense Forces finding and identifying a first responder that died on October 7th in, I don't remember if he's from Nativa Asara.
Yeah.
I'm forgetting which yishuv he's in, from
Right.
Otav Aza, but they revealed this morning they thought he was kidnapped. They found that he was killed, and they just found his body within Israeli sovereign territory. But just that idea where that guy was on October 7th, hearing what's going on and saying, everyone's going inside, locking themselves up. I'm going to go outside and see what I could do to help others. Of course, he had no idea that this was unusually dangerous. It was
Yeah.
different than usual. He didn't stand a chance. But that is so inspiring that a human being can make that sacrifice. I think all first responders make a sacrifice of their time, of their money. They sometimes have to buy their own gear with their own money. They're spending
Hmm.
money on gas. They're doing this if they're volunteering during their work time. They're giving up sleep, family time, and sometimes they're giving up their mental health. They're traumatized, and
Yeah.
sometimes they're giving their life. So this is a side topic, but I do help a lot of first responders through psychological first aid, and I am one. So
No.
first responder well-being is kind of like a side
Yeah.
expertise I deal with.
Yeah. So maybe let's dive into the course. You're taking all of this practical wisdom that you've accumulated over the years, and I mean, just kind of looking over the description of it, like it sounds like you're really giving something of real solid worth. How did you go about wanting to even put something together like this? First of all, even though you're kind of touching on it already, like I hear the passion there, but what made you say I want to put this thing together, and how did you go about organizing it, putting it together? What is it as a class?
Well, there's a few parts to the question. There's the historical part of it, which is, how did you even arrive at these ideas and organize it in this way?
Mm,
There's the part of, why are you distributing it to others and making it accessible? I understood from running national programs in Israel and from helping people around the world that there's no need for me to do everything. It's very important to delegate. It's very important to train other people.
yeah.
I got to an age where I'm 20 years older than people who are just starting in the mental health profession and other professions. And it's incredibly gratifying to train somebody in with knowledge that you have, see them do the work, and you can help mentor them into being good at it and passing the scepter onto somebody else. And this is what I did in national programs, and this is what I'm trying to do here: is let me have somebody in different continents do this and different languages do this, and take what I learned over all these years and be able to help others. And it's beautiful when you do that and you get feedback. It could be 6 months later, it can be a year later, but I'll get a WhatsApp message and it will say something like, we had a terrible tragedy last night in our community. A family died in a car accident, and we knew exactly how to support them because of the training you gave us. These three people that took your course went and did XYZ. This is how it turned out. It was really incredible to see. Thank you so much.
Hmm.
So I wouldn't say I get that every day, but I get that every few months. And
Sure.
October 7th, we gave a number of free workshops all around the country. And then those stories started coming in. I was able to support my brother who's a soldier, whose friends were killed in Gaza. I was able to help my friend whose son was killed in Gaza, etc., etc. So don't hold on to the wealth, spread the wealth. And I
Yeah.
think that's part of what we're here for. Take what you're good at and share it outwards.
that expanding vision. I mean, that's motivating the international work as well. I imagine like this sort of
Sure,
this interconnected network. Yeah.
sure. I have contacts around the world. A lot of the stuff that I've taught have been used in Nigeria, in Ukraine,
Mhm.
in the United States, which I laugh at because I'm from there, but it is far away from here, to be
Okay.
honest.
Yeah. It's a different world. It's a different world over there.
Yeah. South Africa, North Africa. So yeah.
Okay. Okay. Where do you find all the time to do all this?
The way my week is structured
Yeah.
is, I mean, if there's an emergency, so then there's an emergency. But generally speaking, I try to be more involved in this teaching in the first half of the week. I am very organized, and I have a staff. I have
Mm.
two people on my staff that help me.
Okay.
Without them, I couldn't do any of this. I couldn't have a big reach like I do.
Hmm.
Um, I realized I didn't answer your question about how the course is structured, and I also didn't tell you how I got to these ideas.
This is good too.
Yeah.
Let's have it all, man.
Okay. The course is structured into four modules or four sessions. The first module is basically introducing people to what's called disaster behavioral health.
Mm.
Disaster behavioral health or acute trauma, acute traumatic stress is how do people show up to bad things? When bad things happen, how do people react? What can you expect? What's normal? What's not normal? So we give a glimpse into that. We try to bring as many empirical sources as we can. There's a lot of studies in that. And we're painting a picture so that when you meet somebody like this, you'll be able to theorize, oh, I heard about that idea. I heard about that reaction symptom. I
Hmm.
heard about these stages of grief, whatever it might be. That's very theoretical and that's problem centered, but that's module one.
Okay.
And we don't talk about post trauma. We don't talk about PTSD. We don't talk about complex PTSD. We might touch on it here and there, but that's more clinical. That's the stuff that therapists typically deal with is something happened 5 years ago and I need your help. We're talking about something happened 1 minute ago, I need your help, up till a month later.
Hmm.
Right? In clinical terminology, we'd call that acute traumatic stress reaction,
Yeah.
ASR, or ASD, which is acute stress disorder, up to a month. This is going to be on a personal level. This is going to be on a communal level. So we teach the course from both of those angles.
Yeah.
That's module one. Module two is what is psychological first aid? What on earth is it? What's the difference between that and other names out there, between that and mental health first aid, for example, emotional first aid, for example? There's so many different things out there. There are
Well,
different models of PFA.
and there's also a lot of pitfalls in that because I mean the first problem that comes up clinically is reinforcing the problem.
Sure. Hmm. Sure. We talk about this. We touch on that in module two and in
Okay.
module three a lot. We take about 10 different models of PFA, of psychological first aid, that are taught in the world, and we compare them, contrast them.
Hmm.
What are the strengths and weaknesses, and which are the ones that I settled on that are kind of like foolproof? They seem to be reasonable enough that they don't harm people and they only help people. That's what I like to do. I try to organize them in a coherent way.
So you give it a
And
broad overview then. It's not just you're not just presenting your own insights, but well, what works in
yeah,
terms of like your own experience, but a real broad literature on the topic.
yeah, I strongly feel we shouldn't try to reinvent the wheel if somebody out there already made something that's workable.
Just use that. Yeah.
I definitely have my own insights about how I've used it and how people responded to it because I was there and I did it.
Hmm.
And I have a lot of nuances. I would say that psychological first aid in the world is taught on a very grand scale. They're always pitching it as there's this big stadium filled with thousands of evacuees. Some major event just happened with tens of thousands of people, and now you're in this stadium helping people. And I've been in that setting before, and I've done that type of work, but that's not typically the type of work that most people relate to and want the skills for. I think we all, as parents, as community members, as educators, therapists, we all know very small scale disasters. Somebody that died by suicide, somebody that was raped, somebody that they got in a car accident. I mean, these are so common. They got an injury. It could be a work accident, and so on and so forth. Somebody that suddenly died of, in Hebrew you call it the chaydak hatoref, meningitis. I
Okay.
mean, it goes on and on.
Yeah.
And those are more relatable. Those are things you hear about in the community much more often than hurricanes.
Yeah.
So,
Right.
I think one of my specialties is taking that body of knowledge and translating it, boiling it down to small scale domestic events. But we do teach it also on a large scale. That's
Hmm.
that's module 2.
Okay.
Module 3 is you're at the scene of blank. Makes no difference what that scenario is. How do you now take what you learned and do triage? There are 6 people in need. There's only one of you. What do you do? Or one of them is special needs, one is elderly, and one is middle aged. Who do you start with first? And so there's all these scenarios as far as populations. Um, this person is screaming on the top of their lungs. This person is catatonic, and they're triggering them to stay that way. Where do you jump into first? What do you pull out first? And that's for sure really experiential. I mean, I couldn't have
Mm.
known that without doing it. I would say at least 2,000 times. I really
Yeah.
did do it at least 2,000 times.
Yeah.
That's module 3. And finally, module 4 is you've now learned about the problem, you've learned about the solution, you've learned about how to apply the solution, but now you're going to be traumatized because you are exposing yourself to these tragedies. How do you take care of yourself? How do you manage your own trauma? Learning about burnout, vicarious trauma, etc. So that's module 4. Module 4 is already on an organizational level. If you want to set up a
Yeah.
team, you have an organization. You want to have a crisis staff that they're going to either do this telephonically or they're going to drive in cars to a scene and help people. So we teach that also. That's basically how it's structured.
Hmm.
So
Hmm.
it's from A to Z, from the first moment of something bad until a month later, from a family up till a country, and everything in between.
Yeah, double clicking on the first module. You're starting with the individuals that the first responder are coming in and seeing. I thought that was interesting that it's not the context that you're starting with. That sounds like more the second module. What motive? Why did you to decide to go that route, the individual as opposed to setting the stage?
I was never asked that question, but I teach in the course that there are many routes of how people get involved in tragedy.
Yeah.
There are so many ways. I was speaking to a therapist last week from New York. Surprise, surprise, right? A lot of people know people from there. And he was talking about how there was a suicide in his community. And everyone knows that he's a therapist, and he started getting all sorts of phone calls that they're feeling these sorts of feelings, having these sorts of thoughts. This is how they're grieving. And that was his route, his entry point into that call. He didn't know the person, but the people that knew the person knew him.
Yeah.
And that's just one of many ways that people get involved. Um, so I don't really get into who it's for because it's really for everyone in a
Yeah.
different way. There's a school principal that in a certain sense is a social worker. He's dealing with social issues all day and is responsible for every bad thing that happens in the school on some level. Maybe it's to bring experts down, but he's busy having conversations with kids. He's busy keeping his eye out on how his staff is doing and how they're helping the kids. So there are so many ways. It could be doctors or nurse staff in a medical facility.
Mm.
It just goes on and on. So I know that therapists can offer a lot more with their skill set with these courses that I give than maybe a regular person because they can learn how to adapt the knowledge they
Mm.
already have.
Yeah.
But I think because it's for everyone, it's not exclusive, and so I just go right into the topic.
Yeah. 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 What do people generally run into as the first responder? You said, these patterns of behavior that all the bystanders are going through. What does that generally look like?
It's going to depend on the setting that we're talking about, the type of tragedy or shocking event that we're talking about, but just for the sake of a silly example,
Yeah.
I was at a mental health conference a few months ago. I don't know if you were there at the Neve conference in Harnof,
Mm.
but anyway, somebody spilled a coffee on the floor, and it was right by the entrance where people walk in. And even something as underwhelming as that shocking event, when somebody spills a coffee at the doorway to a conference, immediately there's a social problem. No one quite knows whose job it is to clean it up, what action to take. People are looking at you, and so you want to maintain your image in front of other people. Should you go clean it up and then people will characterize you as a certain type of person? Should you not do anything?
Mm.
There's no script for that situation.
Yeah.
And so I'm not even talking about coming home and finding that somebody died. I'm talking about a coffee spilling.
Coffee cup. Yeah, yeah.
The coffee spilled, and in this case that I'm talking about, a bunch of people kind of stood around and they just weren't sure what to do. And that's exactly where a first responder steps in, because they're like, oh, I know how to take emergency unscripted situations, whether they're at night or by day, people that I know or don't know, roadside or in a home, it makes no difference. I know how to step in and do problem solving. And I have that identity. I don't mind looking to others as that person, because anyway, I anyways am that person. I don't mind being that person. Maybe I get paid to be that person. And so in this case, I said, here's a problem. Somebody might slip. I looked to the nearest person. I said, would you mind standing right here and making sure people that walk right into the hallway don't slip in the coffee? And in the meantime, I'm going to go get some way to clean this up. Sure.
Yeah.
So I'm giving out jobs, right?
Secure the danger zone. Step
That's right.
one. Yeah.
I went to the bathroom, which is right nearby, got some paper towels, did a cursory cleaning up of the spill, and then I went to the organizers and I said, this spill happened. Can you bring the janitor type person? 20 minutes later, that person shows up and he's cleaning. And that's literally what I teach people, but it's about something very serious and more chaotic than what I described. But people, they, when you ask how do people show up to unscripted situations, let alone death or blood or gore or etc., that's how they show up at the least.
At the least.
At the least.
Not
Yeah,
knowing what to do and hoping someone's there who does.
that's right.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean that makes sense. Like as the DNA for the second module. I mean that's really just being carried over into different contexts. It's the same pattern of behavior. Secure, be Johnny on the spot. Be the guy who knows exactly what's going on. Direct the traffic. Secure the area. Solve the problem. And then the post crew, whatever that's going to be, is sorting out the issues afterwards.
It's funny. You reminded me that on Lag BaOmer, which we had recently, so there was a lot of people walking in the street because there were all these events outside, bonfires and music. And so a child was hit by a car because children are usually not out at 11 at night, but all these kids were spilling into the streets. A car hit a child, lightly injured, nothing too serious. Anyways, so the ambulance was trying to evacuate the child to the hospital, and there are still all the same people in the street cluttering the evacuation route for the ambulance to drive
Yeah,
through and take.
yeah.
So I used my um, directing traffic skills of the police in order to clear the road, in order to direct the ambulance. So it's, there's a crossover. It happens. It's funny that way, but ultimately it's the same old thing, whether you're pulling out a skill from law enforcement, a skill from an EMT, a skill from a therapist, or all of them together for that matter.
Yeah, yeah. It's also bringing up the tragedy of people who I'm sure every single person there who didn't know what to do wished they did, and in that confusion they're actually amplifying the problem. They're getting
Yeah,
in the way of the
there's
ambulance. It's
sure there's sometimes an utter sense of helplessness, confusion, and then guilt that ensues
mm,
because they say in survivor's guilt in hindsight, oh, I didn't know what to do. I should have done this. I should have done that. And we always say to them in the clinic, well, with what you knew at the time, you did the best you could, which
Right.
might be true,
Right.
but it's also true that if you would know even more of what to do at the time, maybe you could have been even more helpful. It's also true. And that's why you have disaster experts in Israel like Moshe Farhi with the 6 C's model.
Mm.
He talks about um, if you see that somebody's feeling helpless, give them a job, give them a task, activate them. Let them do something. Let them feel that they're instrumental in what's going on. And if you can do that, they're going to remember how they showed up at this scenario. And when they use their hindsight, they'll be like, oh, yeah, I had an important job. I was the one telling everyone to move out of the street.
Yeah.
Whether people heard them or didn't hear them, that makes no difference. They're going to experience it differently. So there's a lot to say on that.
Well, I mean,
Even as far as encoding trauma.
yeah, yeah. Well, I mean, that's kind of like shifting into the third module in terms of what are the skills that people who are interested in this program, what could they expect to actually gain in that third module?
Well, I teach some protocols in the second module, and you can find them online. And you can even learn them for free. And I don't even hide that, and I encourage people to do it.
Hmm.
But the problem is, I don't think you'll know how to apply it. And I also buy courses of other people all the time, and I'm learning now a course on death notification
Mm.
from a paramedic that's done death notification thousands of times. I've done death notification, but not thousands of times. And this person's done it thousands of times, and um, they'll get the schema of like, okay, I walked into utter chaos. I have no idea what to do. Oh, I remember these 8 steps, or these 3 steps, or these 6 steps for this scenario. But then in module 3, it's like, I could do these 8 steps, but who do I do them with first? I'll give you a story. I remember Friday night, actually, in my neighborhood, there was a EMS call of a wellness check, a welfare
Mm.
check, and that means it's a person that hasn't answered the phone for a few days. They're not answering the door. They dropped out of sight in school. Police get this all the time. It's interesting. If there's a call like that, you get like 20 first responders, because the police are the ones that allow people to break in, because you can't just break into somebody's house
Right.
unless the police watch that and
Right.
permit it. So they're standing kind of watching the firefighters break in. The firefighters are good at opening up locked doors, breaking and entering. That's their expertise. And then EMS is there to treat the people, because in Israel, EMS and fire are separated. In America, sometimes they're joined. So
Yeah,
you have like,
it's like a check and
yeah,
balance. It just kind of like occurs to me that we're describing it. That's interesting. I always kind of wonder, well, why are the police showing up? Why are the fire? Well, it's like a check and balance. Like each organization is ensuring the other doing their job in some sense.
yeah, it's a
Yeah,
very
okay,
interesting
that's interesting.
world of. We could talk about it at a different time, but anyhow, so they find this young man. Maybe he was 20. He died by suicide, and he basically filled up. I'm not going to get into the gory details here in this venue, but he filled up his room with a deadly sort of gas, and he died. So he was deceased for a number of days. And then the police now look him up in the computer, which now that I'm a police officer, I know the name of that system. I'm in the system. I can use the system. They find his next of kin. They start calling. Those people come down. And the father shows up. The mother shows up, and siblings show up. Okay. And the father is laughing uncontrollably.
Yeah.
And that is a symptom that if you don't learn this type of course, you wouldn't know how to meet that in the field. Like, what? He's laughing as if he just saw an episode from the Three Stooges.
Right.
Why is he laughing? And then the mother is screaming in agony, and then the children are just bewildered.
Right.
So what do you do? So module 3 would say, try to put your cards on who is the most influential person right now, that if you start with that person first, you can then enlist them to help the others. And so in this case, especially due to the nature of the ethnic, cultural background of these people, it's a very tribal type of person.
Mm.
It was like Ethiopian people. So I, from what I understood, I said, let me work with the father first, because he seems to be like the unquestioned authority figure of this family. Not that I know them well, I didn't interview them, I never met them, but I'm assuming. Which is not always good to assume. If you can ask questions, then you do.
Yeah.
But in this case, I couldn't ask the mother or the father. Neither of them were in a state to talk. I worked with the father, stabilized him, brought him back to the present moment. He finally started crying and coming back to himself and realizing where he is and what's going on. And then we were able to use him to make a plan with me to help mom and him help the kids. So we activated him and mom to help the kids, and then it kind of operated as a family, and they took it from there. And I don't need to be smarter than them, and I don't need to tell them what to do. One of the goals of PFA is get the people on their feet.
Yep.
Once they're on their feet, they'll do their own thing. I don't need to tell them how to do and what to do and how to grieve. Not my business. But in a case where he's laughing and she's screaming and the kids are sitting and don't know what to do, let me bring them back to themselves, and then they'll take it from there. And that's exactly what we did in that case.
Hmm. Hmm. The laughing's an interesting response. The way you were describing it, especially like him being the first pick in terms of who can help create organization. My first thought was it almost sounds like he was appreciating, this is the wrong word, but he was appreciating the irony of what occurred, the tension between his son being alive and then the aftermath of it. How would you size that up? I mean, that's just my knee jerk assumption in terms of like a more of a grasp because but what do you make of that response?
I'm not going to profess that I understand laughter well. I actually saw today in my YouTube feed, Jordan Peterson put out a whole video about laughter. So I'm going to
Hmm.
look that up after. Laughter, after. It rhymes. Um, the way I always understood it was it's a defense mechanism where people have information which is too large to absorb, and so they're just pushing back.
Mm.
And this is like in, let's say, if you borrow Kubler-Ross's stages of grief. So this is kind of a denial,
Yeah.
and so there's way too much information. I shove it back in a different direction and dissociate myself from it, separate myself from it, and when I'm ready, I'll decide to come to it how I want. And it
Mm.
could be after 40 minutes he would have come back to
Yeah.
himself.
Yeah.
I'm not saying he would have been perpetually laughing like the
No, for
Joker in
sure
the
not.
Batman
Yeah.
movie.
No. No.
But for the sake of this situation and for those moments, let me just do a short intervention that took 5 minutes, bring him back to himself, and then let him then operate with dignity and help the rest of his family, so they'll remember those 40 minutes as being totally different and remember their father in a different way. And just and I hear from people that went through these things years later that those are the worst moments of their life, and it's very meaningful to them, for good or for bad, how people interacted with them and how they showed up
Yeah.
on that day. So it can
Yeah.
just change their life in that way.
Yeah. 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 Having that long-term vision, not just in the moment, but who's the person that's going to be able to draw the family forward in their healing process with what they're doing in the moment. You know, who trying to find a good way of putting it. Who ain't cut out for this sort of work? Because that's like that's the last module you're kind of looking at is well, self-care is a more is more where it seems like you're leaning in. Who's this not appropriate for?
This type of work or giving first aid.
Well, I mean, obviously there's a pragmatism in like, God willing, everybody knows how to do the first aid. Um, as far as the self-care option, it kind of begs the question if someone's already having to ask that question as like a long-term profession, you know, uh, pumping the brakes a little bit and asking, well, who can do this well and not suffer necessarily from, I guess, like their sense of the world being shattered. I mean, that's exactly the work you're doing. The world doesn't work the way it ought to, right? No, this is a part of the world.
It's so well said, because these types of people, whether they're the people that take my course or whether it's a social worker who's taking testimony of children that were raped all day,
Yeah.
or any person that's at the forefront of tragedy in a disproportionate way, where maybe by statistics these events are rare, but you're the person in the emergency room, you're the nurse that every gunshot wound and stab wound in Jerusalem comes to you
Yeah.
every day.
Yeah.
So I think having boundaries, knowing that the tragedy that you see isn't yours, knowing how to separate that from yourself on the one hand, but to be empathic on the other and to have that dance. You're meeting somebody, they experienced this. You can't be cold. You have to show up in a way that you care. But then when you're done, you have to know how to leave that behind. And that's a whole skill set.
You're openly guarded.
That's yeah, that's part of it. I think people that have untreated trauma shouldn't be doing this. They're going to be doing it in a way that's going to exacerbate their own trauma, their hypervigilance, their um, their fractured view of the world. Because, like you said, unless you have a way to put the world in context, it's going to kill you. And I think if you know, keep your eye on the prize and you remember why you're doing it and you remember that the world isn't this way, just the way you see it and meet it is this way.
Mm.
um, if you can know that, and then if you can act that way. So for example, you can turn your phone off, you can not always be on shift, you can jump into the neutrality of the world. I talk about this a lot when I give workshops to first responders. um, let's say you go to a terrible catastrophic call and you come home and you just saw people that were murdered, let's say, which I've seen people that were murdered by their own family members, and that's a terrible thing to see and to touch and to hear and to smell, and all of your five senses are involved. And you come home and you're shattered. And then you have your own kids that are that age. You have to know how to navigate that.
Yep.
But if you find how to slip into the neutrality of the world, like you come home and your kids are playing with Lego, and you can sit on the floor and play Lego with them, and you can take them to the park, and you can buy an ice cream, and all of that is very not murderous, like, right? It's
Depends on
it's
the ice cream. Lactose intolerant, the Jewish stomach.
so you know, and you look outside and you see, I from my own examples, from my own trauma, you see a mother in slippers pushing a baby in a carriage in the park, like just
Yep.
the most innocent person doing the most innocent, nicest, most beautiful thing. There's nothing murderous about that. Just she's not prepared for combat. She's not in boots. She's not ready to go deal with tragedy. She's just pushing her kid on the swing. And I think we can all learn how to regulate ourselves. We can learn what's too hard for us when we reach our breaking point. I did a shift in EMS 2 Friday nights ago. I lost sleep all Friday night. There's a toll on your sleep.
Yeah.
There's a toll on your family. But guess what? Last week I didn't take a shift, and this week I'm not going to take a shift. But not everyone knows how to do that. Families fall apart. People get
Hmm.
divorced.
Hmm.
People fall apart. What's even worse is, on an organizational perspective, a lot of
Yeah.
first responder organizations reward the most active people who are going out nonstop.
Yeah.
Maybe they have marriage issues, and this is their way of getting out of the house instead of making the house a place you don't want to run from. And they're busy getting awards that they went on 500 calls this month,
Yep.
and it's actually destroying their life. So
Yeah. Yeah.
a lot
Yeah.
of
Yeah.
complexity.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, just even just like one piece. I mean, just a slew of reasons why in that scenario it would be wreaking havoc in a person's private life. But I mean, just work the night shift and enjoy the divorce that follows 3 years later. I mean, just one of those factors is very debilitating.
Yeah.
It almost sounds like the way of like almost like integrating this is like you're reclaiming your life. It's not
Yep.
it's not the other person's life that you were a visitor in and trying to create some sort of path forward for them, but then you take your own, in some sense. It's a not compartmentalizing. It's more sophisticated than that, but it's something along those lines.
Sure.
Yeah.
And it has a lot to do also with how you identify. It has to do a lot with your self-esteem. If you meet a client with low self-esteem and now he's a first responder, it's a terrible mix
Yeah.
because it's going to fuel him to feel useless, suddenly have a burst of worthfulness, and then keep coming back like a drug.
Yeah.
And he's not going to be able to manage that in a balanced way. I don't need to be on a Friday night shift for weeks in a row. I feel useful enough that I don't
Yeah.
need to plug into that. I
Yeah.
also don't mind teaching people around the world to do this work instead of me, as opposed to I'm going to be the savior. I'm going to save everybody. I'm going to be in every podcast. I'm going to save the whole world. I don't need to be that person because I'm
Yeah.
just happy with who I am.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. Yeah.
there's a lot of pitfalls if you're not careful.
Conversely, that was the kind of the point when I first asked this question that you were raising also, that aside from people not interested in taking this on as a career, just your average person, I mean, this strikes me as something which is almost a type of like inoculation, like a building of resilience. If, God forbid, these sorts of things do occur in a person's life, having some way of combating that confusion that we were talking about earlier.
Absolutely. I think that if shocking, catastrophic trauma comes upon them unexpectedly 20 times, I don't know how much inoculation that will do.
Right.
But if it happens 20 times and they sense that they are getting familiarity and mastery over it, and I know exactly how you can understand that as a clinician, then I think they're going to build their own self efficacy and they're going to say, I can reference when blank happened in order to solve this. And last time this worked and this didn't work and that type of thing. Last time I knew that I would cry for this many days and come out of it, whatever it has to be. So yeah, I definitely think it can build resilience.
Mm.
And I would say that somebody who does psychological first aid, I don't ever, let's say like this, I never took a dollar from anybody in the world during a crisis for the services that I give because they're in crisis and I want to be there to help them. I've also never taken money as a police officer. I've also never taken money because I do that as a volunteer basis.
Yeah.
I've never taken money as an EMT. I do that as a volunteer. But I would say that there are so many types of people that they're already in the space of a first responder, whether we said they're a teacher, whether they're working in some organization that maybe it's a soup kitchen, maybe it's um, a hostel for kids at risk. I mean, the list goes on,
Mm.
and you're already in the presence of people struggling and experiencing stuff, and then this set of skills is going to help you do what you're already doing in a way better way.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
I I made a video about this on my YouTube channel, Avi Tenenbaum PFA. If you look it up,
Yeah, we'll put that in the description of the video also.
I just remember I have all these memorable calls, and I feel that the stories are very illustrative. So I once went as an EMT to an at-risk girls hostel. So these are girls that are not allowed to leave on their own.
Yeah.
They all use drugs. They get into a lot of trouble. A lot of them are at risk for suicide and self-harm. Anyways, we get a call of a unconscious girl at this hostel. First of all, it's very interesting because as a first responder, you get access to people and places that you never even knew existed.
Yeah.
This is a place run by the government and they're guarded and protected. And before you know it, it's a whole world inside a
Yeah.
building that you
Yeah.
didn't
They're
know.
just hidden, right? You just have no idea. Yeah.
We go in there and there's a maybe 16 or 17-year-old girl who's literally unconscious. And it's very strange because young people usually live to be 80, 90, 100. They don't usually die when they're 17.
Right.
So there must be a reason.
What's the deal? Yeah. Right. Right.
Does she take drugs? No. We check her pockets. There's no drugs in her pockets. It's probably not an overdose. We're trying to figure it out. We take her vitals. The vitals are perfect, healthy.
Hmm.
And this is just because I'm experienced enough. I said, who is her best friend? Bring me her best friend.
Okay,
So
good. Yeah. Yeah.
because they got the inside information.
Right.
So they brought me her best friend, and because we're dealing with minors, so I went with somebody else, and we spoke to the best friend in the corner. I said, "Look, we're not going to tell anybody. It's not our job to get anyone in trouble. But what really happened here? Because there's something you know that we
Level
don't
with
know."
us, kid. Right.
She says this girl was raped last night, and I think she's just realizing it now.
Right. Right.
So that was literally a psychological dissociation that we were seeing. It's somebody who's
Yeah.
dissociating. That's all it is. They don't need CPR.
Yeah.
They don't need oxygen. They just need to be brought back to themselves. And then obviously they're going to need mental health treatment.
Yeah.
And by the way, the eighth step of PFA that I teach is to connect people that you're working with to further resources. And so
Mm.
let's say I would take that girl, I would send her to the clinic that the place operates because I'm going to be there for an hour or for 5 minutes, but I'm not going to replace all of the community resources, and I'm not going to do 3 or 4 years of psychotherapy. So, you know, but we can step in there, we can do that outreach, and we can make sure that either she knows about the resources or the person in charge of her and gets her on the trajectory towards getting the help that she needs. So,
Beautiful. Beautiful. So the clock's kind of burning out, and I want to make sure everybody knows when is this event, what time, all the details.
so, very excited. We're going to be giving an online course. I've never done it in an online format before. I've always done it in person.
Okay, yeah.
So this is pretty cool. It's going to be on July 30th, June 1st. So that's a Sunday, Monday. Did I say that? Sorry. June 30th, July 1st, Sunday, Monday. And then July 7th, July 8th, Sunday,
Okay,
Monday.
okay.
And you can check it out on our website and get the information from the place. It's going to be from 5:30 p.m. till 10 p.m. Israel time. And like we said, it's going to be on Zoom. We have a beautiful landing page. We have a flyer if you want more information. They can contact the place. They can contact me through my website, psychotraumaunit.com. I can send you the link. And I'm super looking forward. And once people take the course, we have an alumni community where everyone that took the course, we get together every few months for free. Ad infinitum, as long as I'm able to do it, I enjoy it. Like I said,
Yeah,
it makes me happy. I see all the people. We get to talk about if we use the skills, how to brush up, how to review, people network, and it's just very exciting. So you get that as part of the course as well.
beautiful, beautiful. Well, Avi, it was real pleasure talking with you today. And it's
Likewise.
just it sounds like it's a worthwhile course. So if anybody can do it, sounds like they ought to. It's one of those things.